There we go. So, welcome everybody. This is a workshop on Respondus lockdown browser, and we're primarily going to be going over like different settings and things like that, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But it looks like I know just about everybody who's in this session. But for those of you that don't know me, I'm Matt West, and I'm the instructional technologist with Citi, and I'm kind of the primary support person for Respondus lockdown browser. So we're going to be talking a little bit today about lockdown browser and how it can make your testing sessions just a little bit more secure. And so let's go ahead and get started. So I wanted to ask the group, have you guys used lockdown browser before for your exams? I'm sure, for sure all of you have maybe heard of the name lockdown browser. Yeah, it looks like I've got a couple thumbs up there. Yeah, it looks good. So for those of you that don't know about lockdown browser, just wanted to talk a little bit about what exactly it is. And there's actually different parts to lockdown browser. So lockdown browser is a separate browser. So when I say web browser, that means that it's like how you access websites. So like Google Chrome or Firefox, those are really popular web browsers, but lockdown browser is actually a separate web browser, and it's a custom made browser by this company called Respondus, and it's a browser that locks down the student's computer when they're taking a test. So originally it was designed for like a lab scenario, like students were testing in a lab and everybody would open up lockdown browser and it would lock down the computer. That way the student couldn't be accessing something else, whether maybe the proctors like got their head turned or something. So it locks down the entire computer. It doesn't let them open up any other programs. So they won't be able to open up like a separate tab and have like Wikipedia open or their notes or anything like that. And it also restricts things like copy and paste. They won't be able to, if they have like a second monitor, it also is like kind of locks down that as well. So that's the purpose of lockdown browser. Essentially just locks down the computer to make the exam more secure. And it's really useful for testing on campus where you don't have to worry about the exam room itself being compromised. But Respondus Monitor is another piece that you can add on top of Lockdown Browser, and it's a fully automated proctoring solution. So this is really built for students who are testing remotely. So the two different pieces, Lockdown Browser by itself is more for like, I would say on-campus use. Using just Lockdown Browser when students are testing at home, it will add some security to your exam, but nowadays students have phones and iPads and stuff, and they could easily just like open up their phone and get all the answers on there. So lockdown browser is not going to really help with that, but it would make it a little bit more secure so they couldn't open up stuff on the testing computer. But Monitor will really help with exam security when students are testing at home because it's going to do a couple of things. It records the student's webcam, so you'll be able to see them testing throughout the entire session. And the webcam's been turned on, so you will be able to see if somebody comes up in the room, or you'll be able to see if like maybe they've got their phone open, or if their head is like turned away for too long, or somebody walks into the testing room. And it also records audio too. So you'll be able to hear if like maybe the student has a I don't know, like some recording playback device that's like reading out answers to them in the background. And another thing that Respondus Monitor does is it uses AI, and it sort of can calculate things like if the student's eyes are turned away from the computer for too long. So like normally you would expect a testing session to look something like this. The student's looking at the computer, they're typing or using the mouse. If their eyes are like down here and their head's like down here for too long, that might indicate that they're, maybe using an outside resource there. It will also, when they are starting up the session, when they're starting up the monitor session, it's going to make them like turn the computer around, like basically do like a full 360 angle. That way you could see if there's anything on the wall behind or like behind the computer, anything on the desk, anything like that that they could use for like cheating basically. And then after all that's done, so after the testing session's done, Respondus is doing some calculations and things, and it will give you some like statuses. It's basically like a level of the exam integrity, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But there's different levels. There's like green, yellow, and red. So that's just kind of the overview of what we have available with Respondus. This is the agenda for today. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is communication to students. That's really important because you want your students to have a really good testing session, not have any technical glitches, anything like that. That's like the most ideal testing session. And then also we're going to talk about how to enable LockDown Browser and Monitor in your Canvas course. We're also going to talk about what to do during testing. So like what you as the instructor should be doing during the testing session, whether that's on campus and all students are testing in the same session, or if students are testing at home. And then we're going to talk a little bit about checking and interpreting those monitor results that I was telling you about. So let me know if at any time you have questions, just feel free to stop me or give a little thumbs up or something like that in Zoom, or you can type into the chat. I've got a couple of my colleagues from Citi, and they can be, they'll be glad to like look over and answer your questions if they can. So the communication to students, this one is so important. And it's really something that a lot of people like either forget to do or just don't realize that they have to do. But you should always notify your students in advance if you're going to be using LockDown Browser or Monitor. And what I would recommend doing is telling them at the beginning of the term, even possibly putting it in your course syllabus, that we're going to be using LockDown Browser, Monitor for this course, and just giving them a little bit of information about that. Because one reason it's important is, I've got here on the hardware requirements, students do need a laptop, preferably, that has a webcam built in and a microphone built in, and it needs to be like a Windows or a Mac computer. I know one student I was working with, they only had access to like a Chromebook, and at that time, LockDown Browser did not work on Chromebooks, and it still doesn't work very well either. So that was kind of a drawback. The student actually had to like go and I think check out a laptop from the METC. So I think that's why it's really important to notify students. Also, some students, they might not be comfortable with using like a camera in their home environment. So they might need to like set up a time to go to the library in like a private setting to test. And you should also set up a practice test. So before students ever get access to a live test with Respondus, anything, you should always set up a practice test, because that will eliminate a lot of the technical issues that you can run across. And some of those might include like students don't know where to go to download LockDown Browser. Students might have an issue installing it on their computer. Maybe it's like a work computer that they don't have admin access to, and they just don't have the permissions to install it. Or if it's like a really old computer that isn't compatible with LockDown Browser, having a practice test you'll be able to figure out those issues well in advance of the actual testing session. Because the last thing you want is students to be taking a test and them to have problems, and then they're like in a panic because they're supposed to be taking a test and they can't get in and all that stuff. But we do have a document that I wanted to show you guys, and let me get it pulled up here. It's actually this link here, but let me open it up here. It's got a lot of useful things in there. So let me see here. It is, let's see here. So if you get into Blackboard, it's under the Help for Instructors tab, and we are gonna set this up in Canvas at some point. We're still kind of working out the tweaks with that here, but it's called, if you go to Respondus here, and it's called Preparing to Administer Assessments with a Respondus LockDown Browser and Monitor. This is going to give you a lot of information about how to be prepared for, giving your tests with LockDown Browser and Monitor. And the thing that I wanted to show you, there's a couple things. There's this sample communication document for Lockdown browser. That's if you're just using Lockdown browser. And there's one for monitor as well. So let me open this one up and show you guys what it looks like. And so we did a lot of the hard work for you. So if you want to, you can give this document, as soon as my Microsoft Word opens up, you can give this document to your students, and it pretty much tells them everything they need to know about using, where is it here? About using monitor in your course. So this is the document. It's a template, meaning that it's designed to be edited. So you can't just give them this directly. You will have to do a little bit of like tweaks to it because it's got some specific information about your course in there. So definitely like edit the stuff in like bold text or the stuff that's like yellow highlighted here. But what it has is it's got links for how to use Lockdown browser, specifically the computer requirements. So like if a student has a really old computer that might not be compatible, so it'll give them all the hardware requirements, and there's a link to that here. And it's also got the download link for Lockdown browser. And there is not a publicly available download link for Lockdown browser. It is specific to Rush. So this is something that you will have to give your students. They won't be able to just get access to it by Googling it. There is a way that they can get access to it on that Help for Students page in Blackboard, and I can go over that in a second too. But normally it's just best to post this link, and this is a specific link that's just for Rush. And when they click on it, it will download Lockdown browser to their computer, and then they can install it. And also, Lockdown browser is specific to the school. So if they've used Lockdown browser at another school, that won't work. It actually has to be a specific Rush version of Lockdown browser. And I've run into that a couple of times too. So it gives them information here about needing access, like needing admin access. This one's more specific to Blackboard. I think that's also why it's important to like edit this. But moving forward, we'll change some information here about Canvas. But this is some information about the instructor, but it gives you a lot of the stuff here. It talks about like Wi-Fi on campus, like where to go for help, all that kind of stuff. So this will get you started. And it also tells students about like what a good testing environment looks like, so not wearing hats and things like that. So this should get you started and also like give the students a little bit of information about how to test using Respondus monitor. The next thing I wanted to talk about is, let's go back to my Chrome here. Okay, so we talked about setting up a practice test. That's what you should do, like probably I would say at least a week or two in advance of your actual test that's being given. And the practice test, like I said, will help like alleviate a lot of those problems. And the practice test can just be something silly, like 2 questions, like what's your favorite pizza topping? That's one that I always like doing, something like that. And that way students will find out well in advance if their computer is going to work, if they're going to have any problems. Sometimes students are on like they can be like on a flaky internet connection that doesn't work very well with Respondus monitor. And because Respondus monitor is like using video and audio, it does need a fairly decent internet connection. So I had one student that was using a satellite internet connection in a rural area, and it just was not working very well. So finding out those things in advance, so that way maybe you could work with the student and come up with an alternative. That's always better than figuring out like last minute. So that's the communication piece. Basically, you just want to communicate to your student really well that they're going to be using monitor, like what it is, how to get it installed, and sort of like how to test properly with it. Now I want to talk about enabling Lockdown browser for a quiz. We also have a help topic on that one as well. I'm going to be talking specifically about Canvas here, since I think most of us are teaching in Canvas at this point, but it's really easy to turn on Lockdown browser for a quiz. All you have to do is in your Canvas course, click on this Respondus Lockdown browser button. And if you don't see that for some reason, you can go under settings here and go to navigation, and it's probably down here at the bottom, and you can just drag and drop it up at the top and then click save. to add that to the course menu. But click on Respondus Lockdown Browser here. And the first time you click on it, and actually even after that, it's going to keep showing this like resource page, which is actually really helpful. There's like an introduction video for you as the instructor. There's also like video tutorials, and it talks about like setting it up for new quizzes and classic quizzes. There's like a getting started page. There's like a support page. So it's really useful. And students will get something similar as well when they open up Lockdown Browser. But if you get tired of seeing this, you can click this button here, like don't show this page again. And then you just click continue to Lockdown Browser. And this is going to show every quiz that you have loaded in your Canvas course. And to turn on Lockdown Browser, all you have to do is find your quiz. So I can come down here to this, like, I will do the unnamed quiz. You click the little drop down arrow button and then click settings. And then you click require Respondus Lockdown Browser for this exam. And that's going to turn on Lockdown Browser. And if you want to, you can set up an access code. And then there's also some advanced settings under here. Usually you don't need to look at these, but you can if you want to. Like sometimes like people want to turn on the calculator, and that's how you can do that as well, because otherwise students won't be able to access the calculator. So there's a couple of other like advanced settings here. You can take a look at them, and it's really nice because it explains what it does if you like hover over this explain button. But normally the default settings are fine. And if you want to turn on monitor, you can do that from here as well. So you click this require Respondus monitor button. And then it's going to give you this pop-up that's telling you that it's an automated proctoring system, and it uses the webcam, and it uses like vision technology to flag events, blah, blah, blah. So continue to Respondus monitor. Now we've turned on monitor, and usually the default options are fine as well. And it's going to go through a startup sequence for the student. And that's even before they get into the exam. Once they click on Respondus Lockdown Browser and then get to start, like before starting the exam, they go through this like startup sequence to make sure that everything is like working as it should. And it gives them a webcam check. So it's going to make sure that their webcam is working and not like being locked by another program. And if you click on this preview button here, it popped up in an open window, but it will actually show you like what the thing will look like for the student. So it's kind of a cool feature, but it gives also additional instructions, guidelines, tips. There's a student photo where students have to like, it basically takes a photo of that student. So that way you can make sure that that was the student who was actually taking the test. And you can turn on if you want them having to show their ID. It's like a school ID or state ID or something like that. That way you can match the photo with like the person's ID. And then there's the environment check that I told you guys about, that they have to like move their laptop around to like scan the area. And then it does a facial detection check. So you can turn on and off these options if you want to. But like I said, I think the default options are okay. And then there's these facial detection options. I just leave those as default too. And then there's a couple of advanced settings here. Usually you don't have to use those at all. So what most people only have to do is just click this to require, and then click require Respondus monitor, and then click save and close. You normally don't have to look at any of those settings at all. And then it's going to tell you as soon as the page, there it is, that this is the quiz that I just edited. And it also adds in the name of the quiz, this requires Respondus Lockdown Browser plus webcam. That also lets the student know that it's a requirement. And then it's going to tell me here that it's required, and then also tell me that Respondus monitor is required. So it's got Lockdown Browser and then proctoring. So that's what you want to look for. You want to make sure these two things are turned on. But that's how you set up, that's how you enable Lockdown Browser for one of your quizzes. So it's a pretty straightforward process. It only just takes a few seconds or so. As far as, let's see here. Oh, checking for errors. I want to talk a little bit about that. If you enable Lockdown Browser and you go in and change settings, it was actually worse in Blackboard than it is for Canvas, but it still can happen. If you enable Lockdown Browser and then let's say you go back in and you do some edits to the quiz, like after you enabled Lockdown Browser, what you'll see is this error message right here. And it says error, fix it. And you definitely want to look for that because otherwise students won't be able to start the test in Lockdown Browser if there's an error. And if you click the fix it button, that should fix the error, usually like right away. And now it says required. That's what we want to look for, that green thing there. What can trigger this is if you go in and change the name of the quiz, or if you add a password after you turn on Lockdown Browser, anything like that that can like mess with it. So what I recommend doing is just like making sure your quiz is ready to go. You don't need to make any edits, and then turning on Lockdown Browser. As far as, let's see, let's talk about what to do during testing. This is always like a really important topic, I think, but what you as the instructor should do while students are testing. So if they're testing in the lab, more than likely you're going to be there and there's going to be somebody on campus that could help out. The people that are in like the ATC or the labs that are usually like on the 9th floor, they can definitely help out with any like technical issues with the computers that are going on there. Usually it doesn't happen, but if it does, they're like right there to help you. So easy enough, right? Where it can be a little bit tricky is when students are testing at home, like remotely, and like you might not be available, something like that. It can be a little bit tricky, but you should let your students know what to do if they have problems with testing. So one thing I always recommend doing is having the student reboot the computer and attempting to resume the quiz. And actually, most of the problems that we see with Lockdown Browser for the student side happen before the student can even start the test. So it's pretty rare to have a problem during the testing session. Usually, it's like the student can't even get into Lockdown Browser for some reason. So just kind of keep that in mind. That will fix like probably 90% of problems, just having them reboot their computer. Sometimes there's like an application that's running behind the scenes that's like tying up their webcam and their microphone or something along those lines. So just have them reboot the computer. That should fix the issue. If that doesn't fix the issue for them, there is a Respondus chat button if you've got monitor enabled. When the student's going through that like setup, like the webcam check and all that, there'll be a little button that says like have a problem, like get help, and they can click on that and they can start chatting with Respondus support, and Respondus can help them directly like figure out how to get it working. If for some reason that's not working, they can always contact the METC at 3 class, and they can try to help out if they can, or they'll pass the issue on over to me. And then they should also let you as the instructor know if they're having problems. So if it's taking more than just a couple minutes or so to get in there and start the test, you should tell them to send you an email or whatever communication you want, just to let you know, keep you in the loop with what's going on. So that's what they should do if they're running into problems. If they run into problems during the testing session, like let's say, for example, that they're testing on their laptop and the battery just randomly dies and the computer shuts off, they should try to get back into the quiz as quickly as possible. So reboot the computer and try to restart it. Sometimes students like panic and they don't do that, and they try to reach out to the instructor, and that's can sometimes be a good course of action, but it's always best to get back in there, especially if you have like a timer on the quiz, because that timer is actually still counting down behind the scenes. And if they're unable to get back in there, that's maybe when they can use some of these options here. So like the Respondus chat, the METC, or working out something with you. Also, it's a good idea to have a backup plan. So with technology, anything is possible. There can always be problems. Think about what your backup plan is for students that have issues testing. So if you have all of your students testing at the same time, let's say 9 a.m., what would you do if you have a student who's testing remotely and their computer just dies and they're just not able to get back in there? Will they be allowed to test on a different day? Will they be allowed to test at a different time? Are you going to give them a different test? All that kind of stuff. So just something to think about, maybe just be prepared for that. Like think in your mind, well, if a student couldn't get in, I can have them maybe test tomorrow, or like some instructors tell them that I'll set up a different test and we can just use like Zoom proctoring instead of LockDown browser or something like that. So just kind of have a backup plan in mind, like what you would do for any testing issues. The next thing I want to talk about is checking over the results and like what to do with them for Respondus Monitor. And there's a link here that Respondus gives. If I can get it open, let's see here. I might try to open it in. There we go. So I wish I could show you this, but it's actually really hard for me to generate like Respondus results because I have to log into LockDown browser. And since I'm like an admin in Canvas, it doesn't really like for me to take tests like that. But I can at least show you some screenshots about what it looks like. And I can at least show you where to go to get those results. So if you go back into your Canvas course and you click this little drop down box here, it should say, let's see here. No, unfortunately, no students have taken this test. Let me see if I can find some. It should say like review student results. Here we go, class results. So that's the button you're looking for. And yeah, it doesn't look like anyone took this, unfortunately, but that's basically this screen here. Where's that link? That's basically this screen right here. And it can be really overwhelming to think about having to review, like if you have a class of 75 students, it can be overwhelming to think about, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to review 75 student videos that are like an hour-long testing session. That's going to take like 75 hours of my day, but you don't have to do that. That's what's really nice about Monitor is it's doing all of that like AI stuff on the back end, and it's calculating, if a student looks away or if it hears some audio playing in the background or somebody walks into the room or something like that, it's going to calculate all that for you. So what I would recommend doing is looking for your student results and seeing which ones have a review priority of like high or medium, and ignoring the ones that have a low priority because more than likely there's no issues there. But the ones that have high or medium, it will actually put flags in the video for you. So that way you don't even have to review the entire video. So if you see here, it's got these number of flags 5, and it's got these red bars, and that's kind of telling you where the issue was. And if you look here, it looks like on this video, there's actually another person in the frame. So that's definitely something that would cause Respondus to flag that. Also, if the person's head is like partially out of frame, like their full head is not in the camera, it's like down like this or something, that would cause you, that would cause a review flag as well. Or if their head is turned away, or if they stand up. So you can see all these in the thumbnails here, and you can click through and just kind of review that way. And it even tells you here, like multiple persons in frame, different person in the frame. So it can recognize if there's a different person that comes in and like sits down. And it tells you like how they review, how the review priority is determined. So there's like a lot of technical stuff that goes on there, and like it goes into detail about flags and things. And I can even post this link in the chat. Let's see here, so you guys can take a look at it on your own time. But that's kind of how that works. And one time I was meeting with an instructor, and they got really overwhelmed thinking about having to review all the video. But like I said, you don't have to do that. You can just look at those like high priority ones. And Respondus, it's not going to completely eliminate cheating. I think that's kind of impossible to do. But no, students knowing that they're being recorded and that their audio is being recorded, that should cut down on a lot of that. There's still going to be ways they can cheat, but hopefully that will cut down on a lot of that. That's about all I have for Respondus LockDown browser and Monitor. I wanted to see if you guys had any questions about any of the stuff that I went over. And I can also look over the chat here. You guys have any questions? Anything?
I have a question.
Sure.
Hi. So what about, because I tried to make up a quiz, and I was using Respondus, and then, I went through I had the new code words, the campus wide, I had the code word, the codes and everything was set up. but then it wouldn't let me make the quiz because it said it couldn't find some things. I don't know. I just probably need some help getting my responders on the creating side, creating exam side. Do you have a session for that, or should I contact you guys individually?
Okay. So I'm glad you brought this up. This is actually another really confusing part as well. So Respondus is a company. Respondus is basically a company like, think about it like Microsoft or Apple, and they make multiple products. And one of the products that they make is LockDown browser, and that's the one we're talking about today. The other one that they make is called 4.0, which I realize is like kind of a silly name, but Respondus 4.0 is actually a different product, and it's not something that students use. It is a product that's designed to get like paper tests, like in a Word document format, into Blackboard or Canvas a lot easier rather than having to like manually copy and paste. So
Right,
that I think that's what you're talking about there.
right.
That's actually a totally different product, but feel free
Hmm.
to send me an email. I'll put the support information up
Okay.
here, and
Because
let me put it
I
in the
want to do,
chat
I don't
actually.
want to, because I'm switching over and I don't want to have to like, it's hard to build inside of the, it's building inside. It takes so much time versus building in the Word document or the, RTF and then putting it in. That's so much easier. And so I was just wondering how I can do that.
Yeah, that's definitely a good question. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me about
Okay.
that. I put the email in the chat. It's city help, CTEI help at rush.edu. That's the best way to get in contact with me. And yeah,
Okay.
Respondus 4.0 is a little bit finicky at times, I think.
Right, right. It was, I got all the way up to the point where I was just gonna just kind of make the test and just launch it. And then it gave me some message and I just couldn't figure it out. So I think, yeah, probably one-on-one help will be best. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, and this is actually something that's new for Canvas that worked very differently in Blackboard. Peg actually brought this up. So thanks for that, Peg. This is about turning on a password for your test. And I think it's a really good idea to have a password if you're testing on campus. That way, students would not be able to start the test unless they get the password from you in person. So, like everybody comes to the room and then you write the password up on the board, and that means that they can get started. Um, Testing remotely, the password maybe not such a big deal, but it could still make it a little bit more secure, I guess. But one really big difference is um, the password section that's in the lockdown browser settings. You actually don't want to use that in Canvas, and it can cause some like conflicts because you can also turn on the password setting in the Canvas quiz settings itself. And if you turn them on in both places, it can like cause conflicting information. So that's why it says here, this is like make lockdown browser requirement for a test in Canvas. And it tells you here, don't set this password access up in the lockdown browser settings. Do that directly in the Canvas quiz settings. And then you can just leave this blank here. So that's one major difference. Whereas in Blackboard, you had to set up the password here if you were using lockdown browser. So pretty big difference there, I think.